Let me try again. A question was recently asked about politics and deism. Specifically, how do politics, uh, well, how do politics affect your deism? Or how do your political views affect your deism? And I thought this was a great question that actually leads into a whole bunch more. For instance, how does your deism affect your pursuit of knowledge in general? I would say that if you're practicing deism correctly, it affects every part of your life in some way, shape, or form. And this is going to span out into a bunch of different topics if you're doing it right. First, let me address the original question and say that I would imagine that it's deism that directly affects the political view, not the other way around. For example, as a deist, I find that things like natural rights and liberty to be essential. Therefore, anything that protects, solidifies, or increases my rights and their understanding tends to be the direction I want to go. Anything that infringes upon my natural, unalienable rights tends to be something that I reject. And this means anything. You know, if your party, and I don't care what party it is, if you are a part of some sort of political party that seeks to restrict I don't know, the right to protect myself the way that I see fit, or um, my freedom of speech or religion, the way that I can practice my deism, I'm probably going to reject it. You know, and it doesn't matter, again, what party it is. It doesn't matter to me. You know, it boils down to rights, politically speaking. You know, and the catch, I think, for most people is understanding the difference between a right and a privilege. Specifically, which exists in the absence of authority, which exists in the absence of a protector or a provider. You know, this is going to be step one for many deists, not all, but many. And I think it's an important thing to note. So let me reiterate that there are several different types of deism. And I think this explains some of that divide. Each sect has its own set of beliefs and values. And while the majority of deism is similar and holds the same overall beliefs, again, not a blanket statement, but for the most part, there are some differences and some who think differently in regard to what I've provided already. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong or bad. It just makes us different. You know, Christian deists and neo-deists are night and day. But still, deists as a whole are going to be more similar between the two than they are from, say, revealed religion as a whole. You know, I know that there's going to be somebody out there, well, Christian deists are really close to Christians. Okay, fine. Again, not blanket statements. I'm just trying to make a point. So, spirit of the conversation, right? Thanks to the internet, though, more people are stumbling upon deism every day. Now, things like Christian deism are usually really good stepping stones. And a lot of deists who have been in deism for a long time, they frown upon things like Christian deism. And I don't think that's probably the wise thing to do. Let people have their stepping stones. You know, sometimes when we learn to swim, you know, we got to hang on to the side of the pool. We got to stay up by the steps. You know, we have this comfort thing that we've got to let go of, and it takes time, you know. But as a community, and this is what I do love about it, we tend to be very open and helpful when people ask for help. Of course, again, this includes answering questions by those who ask. You know, unfortunately, some are answering the questions specific to their specific form of deism and not answering I would say objectively, but in a blanket fashion specific to their own deism. I think that's probably a bad idea. If you're interested in learning about the different kinds of deism, I would say, you know, you could read, let me grab this, you could read my book, Reason, Religion, and the Trinity and Contradictions. I covered that, but there's other sources out there as well. And I would encourage you to read all of them, honestly, so you have a really strong idea of what you're getting involved in. You know, it's important to be well informed. For neo-deists specifically, being well informed about a lot of things is actually a goal. Now, this was another recent question that I thought I would take a minute or two to discuss. I was recently asked about the different books and topics that I write about. The question was essentially why But when we got into it, I think it turned more into how can one be, or for that matter, want to be so diverse in their topics of focus. But again, I think, if you understand the pursuit of knowledge, it's going to be in a whole host of different topics. It is a good question, though, but I want to challenge everybody to understand that I think that when we look at the world objectively, topics are very much connected. So what I'm going to get into here is I'm going to start throwing a lot of these ideas together so you can really get a strong idea of where I'm coming from this, or on this, I should say. And so for those who are unaware, I've written extensively on government and history and politics and natural health and leadership and security and, of course, deism. But I see all of these things being very much connected. Deism, right? An intellectual movement. That's a big part of that. That accepts, of course, the existence of a creator on the basis of reason, but rejects belief in a supernatural deity who interacts with humankind. But again, the intellectual part, I think, is critical to that definition. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. But again, in my book, Reason, Religion, and the Trinity Contradictions, I wrote that God doesn't have to intervene. That's a big part of the whole Trinian, actually. He set forth God laws and governs us that way. And this is done via natural law. Now, again, I'm not going to get into the science and everything else here. I'm making a point. But to understand natural law, I would say that this requires a level of understanding in regard to science, would it not? I mean, you're talking about physics and math. So right off the bat, it's not just religion. All of a sudden, it's scientific. It's physics and it's math and it's even if you wanted to get at botany, I mean, it's a lot of different things, right? Science is the language of God. So we have to expand our minds. We have to expand what we know, and we do that by study. But let's look at the other side. While we're governed by natural law, we're also granted rights, right? These are natural, unalienable rights. These are rights that we are all born with, and we are endowed by our Creator with these rights. And these rights cannot, by definition, be licensed, adjusted, altered, traded, or taken away. That's what unalienable means. And by logical process, well, I would say being a deist would require me to subscribe to this fundamental idea. It'd more than likely drive somebody's politics if that was your position. This is because there are plenty of man-made laws passed every day that attempt to infringe upon our unalienable natural rights. But here's the kicker. I would have to know that. Because I wouldn't know unless I was paying attention, researching, thinking objectively, understanding the process of legislation, and so on and so forth, right? I might need to understand government legislation. And I understand that there's different forms of government, but that's probably a good thing to know too. Why are certain forms of government bad? If we start leaning towards a certain type of government, is that bad for me? Is that bad for my religion? These are important things to know. Researching objectively. Well, it could be a lot of different things. If there are legislators or political parties that seek to infringe upon my natural rights, as a deist, I would have to resist that, right? I would have to resist or reject it. In order to resist or reject those type of infringements, I would need to be involved in politics. So, I would say they're very much hand in hand. Politics are the activities associated with the governance of a country or area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Right there, right off the bat, deism almost requires a certain understanding and perhaps even involvement in the political process. This is a big reason why why perhaps some of you, maybe many of you, have seen me in political circles as well. Because I think that they do go hand in hand. But think of Jefferson, Franklin, Thomas Paine, Allen, and so on. They were definitely political, and their politics changed the world. I want to read you this. As a representative from Virginia to the first Congress, James Madison proposed that, quote, government is instituted and ought to be exercised for the benefit of the people, which consists in the enjoyment of life, liberty, with the right of acquiring and using property, and generally of pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. These words would eventually, of course, become the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is, of course, a list of our rights, such as the freedom of speech and assembly and worship, etc., etc. A further delineation, essentially, of our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you look at it, well, look at a lot of different things. You look at the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which states we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and endowed by that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that's the common theme, all right? You look at deist texts overall, it's about rights. What we have. It's just that's what we have, period. It's the common theme. So let's clear this up. Let's look at definition for a second. Definition of man, a human being of either sex, a person. Definition of endowed, to be given. Definition of unalienable, cannot be licensed, adjusted, altered, traded, or taken away. Definition of rights, a moral or legal entitlement. So basically, all humans of either sex are created equal. Their creator, not government and not a religion, definitely not religion specific, has given them moral and legal entitlements which cannot be licensed, altered, adjusted, traded, or taken away. This includes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or property, depending on how you wanted to look at that and how far you wanted to go back in regard to that definition. Thomas Jefferson took it a step further, as demonstrated previously, and said that the law of the land, the Bill of Rights, is what all humans automatically and permanently have against every government. Of course, this includes local, state, and federal, but every government on earth, general or particular, in what no government which might behave according to what is morally right and fair would ever refuse. It's pretty simple stuff. You know, I've written how the philosopher John Locke defined the natural rights of every person should have the rights of life, liberty, and property. An unalienable or natural right is something that naturally exists in the absence of authority and does not naturally infringe upon the rights of another. Something important to note here is that a right is not provided by authority or even the Constitution, meaning it also doesn't require an investment of capital or the labor of someone else to achieve. It's what you have with you at birth. It's a birthright, a right available to you upon birth and provided to you by your Creator, whomever that might be. In a republic like the United States, the government is actually supposed to protect the unalienable rights of the citizenry. But if you're not paying attention and you don't know what those rights are and you don't understand what's going on in regard to that process, what could happen? I mean, power corrupts over time, right? That's a big part of history. So history is important. Understand what's happening. History repeats itself, right? But let's look at some of just even basics. The basics. Here in the I'll use the United States as an example since I'm from the United States. Did you know that any statute or law can only be made in pursuance of the Constitution? Thomas Jefferson said that, quote, every law consistent with the Constitution will have been made in pursuance of the powers granted by it. Every usurpation or law repugnant to it cannot have been made in pursuance of its power. And he went on to say that basically the latter would be void. All right, now this was actually backed up by the Supreme Court in Marbury versus Madison 5 U.S. 137 in 1803, which states that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. Supreme Court, a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. But here's the problem. If you haven't read the Constitution, if you haven't read the Bill of Rights, if you haven't read the Declaration of Independence, you haven't read all these documents, how would you know? So you got all these people who are swearing an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of something they're not even required to read. Well, that's what separates, I think, a deist from so many, because we seek to discover these little truths. Again, if the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence are all about natural rights, preservation of those rights, and so on, wouldn't it be important to know about them? And also know the other side, the side that seeks to destroy or limit them? I think about the many deists that help form documents like the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. There's a very good reason for it. If you were a deist and tasked with creating a new government, wouldn't you build certain protections? Certain protections for your beliefs, especially, freedom of religion, because it wasn't something that you had prior. If your religion was built around natural laws and natural rights, wouldn't you seek to foster that and protect it? I know I would. So logically speaking, this is why many deists, American or not, find themselves aligning with a constitutional perspective and find themselves as intellectual defenders of documents such as the Constitution, because they've read them and understand that many of the founders were deists and know that they were doing something special. They understood the bigger picture, if you will. And of course, that's not a blanket statement by any means. Like I said earlier, there are plenty of deists in this world that align with something altogether different, politically speaking, than what I've provided. Some of which would actually infringe upon unalienable rights. And while I don't fully understand how or why that situation exists, it exists all the same. And I'm just saying that generally speaking, you're going to find a lot of intellectual patriots seeking out deism. That's not the point, though, at all. I'm pointing out that politics, especially as far as natural rights and infringements go, is important. Because any government that infringes upon a natural right is not a just government. But to understand this requires intellectualism, the exercise of the intellect at the expense of the emotions, right? That's the definition, right? So you eliminate your emotional attachments to things you've been told or sold and look at things objectively. That's how we are supposed to view things. But if intellectualism is the goal, the intellectual movement of deism, well, that requires substance and thought and study. But thought requires brain power. Brain power requires health. Health, specifically natural health, because of the whole natural design thing, right? So let's think about power of the mind for a second. If you look up things needed for proper brain function, you're no doubt going to come across a plethora of websites focused around nutrition. This is because there are a few vitamins and minerals and thousands of phytonutrients that aid the function of the brain. Proteins, fats, thousands of other nutrients, they're all needed. But this requires a solid diet, right? Void of processed foods and other chemicals. But again, if you're doing it right, you need to understand why processed foods and chemicals are bad. You need to understand what a solid diet is. And you have to be able to question the popular notion of what's going on and what you're being told is proper nutrition. That's one of the things that I wrote about in my other book, The Prebiotic Protocol, because what we're being told is, well, a lot of it anyways, is inaccurate. And there's proof. It's not just an opinion. Again, study, right? But again, if we're looking at health, this requires a knowledge of food and health in general, which requires study to achieve that understanding. Of course, with deists, it's not supposed to be a general overview. It's supposed to be a deeper understanding of the processes. Boldly question everything, right? So nutrition gives you power to think, which gives you power to question, which gives you the power to find the answers you seek objectively. And when your brain is firing on all cylinders, you're thinking clearer, you're thinking on a higher level. If you're deist, you're exercising this to its fullest potential because it's important to you, or at least you're trying to. You want your brain in peak physical condition. You're trying to become an intellectual, or if you're already an intellectual, you're trying to achieve a higher level of intellectualism, right? An intellectual is a person possessing a highly developed intellect. Intellect is the faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively, especially with regard to abstract or academic matters, which, could include things like science and history and government. See how I'm saying? All of these things are very much connected. As a deist, our entire belief system is based around reason and the ability to understand something objectively. So again, I see all of these things as very much connected. And understand that if you're a deist, generally speaking, again, not blanket, just generally, chances are that you are striving for intellectualism. And this is done by seeking new information, by exercising your brain, and maintaining a proper diet. This requires a general knowledge of health and the ability to question everything, including popular notions about health. Like I said, let me stress that. Or anything, really, being able to question anything. But as you strive for intellectualism, and ways to further expand, I think, or protect your natural rights, your politics become directly influenced by the endeavor. This is because both health and government, and really anything that you do, are influenced by the things that may directly impact your natural rights or your freedom to exercise free thought. Right? So think outside of the box. So people ask why I write so many articles, and that's kind of why I'm bringing this up, because they ask, why do I write so many different articles about so many different subjects? Again, I don't see them as different. I write about health because health makes me think, or helps me think. I exercise my brain in the attempt to achieve intellectualism, and my politics are driven by the need and desire to protect and expand my unalienable rights, which requires an understanding of politics, government, and history. It's all very much connected. But together, if we're doing this together and we're doing this as an intellectual movement, right, it requires banding together, which requires the ability to bring people together for a common cause. Not only do we have to figure out what that common cause is, but we have to be able to communicate that cause and why it's important to come together for it. And what do you call somebody with the ability to do that? Well, most people, and by definition, some definitions anyway, they would label that person as a leader. Well, for those of you who follow my work on other platforms, you know that leadership happens to be one of my specialties. I believe this is a natural byproduct of my belief system, though. A thinker, where I am well-versed in history, government, politics, health, analysis, and so on, the evaluation of leaders. Leadership was the icing. And I write about leadership as well. I've got an entire website dedicated to it. By the way, if you're interested, that's reasonleadership.com. So you see, politics, government, history, health, leadership, deism, and even security, if you really wanted to get right down to it, are all very much connected, at least for me. And as a deist with a loud mouth, I admit it, not only do I seek to help other deists wherever I can, but I do this by showing them how I look at the world. And for me, that's objectively and from every angle possible. That's not to say that I've got the right way to look at the world, but it's another perspective to consider, at the very least. I lead by example, right? Showing people that it's cool to learn. Being a so-called nerd or geek is a good thing. We should all strive for better answers and better conclusions, even from ourselves. Keep challenging yourself to think stronger, deeper, and more objectively. Constantly seek out new information and perspectives to consider. And also know that if you're doing it right, some of your opinions are going to change from time to time, and that's okay. That's a good thing. Speaking of which, it brings up another interesting question. And I've seen this on a couple of different forums online, deist communities. A lot of people are curious about whether religious texts such as the Bible or the Quran are examined by deists. And I'm going to say clearly, not all deists examine those texts. However, it's my contention that you can't really be against something you don't have a strong handle on any more than you can support or defend something you've never read, like the Constitution. We were talking about that earlier. Just an idea, but I'll tell you that many of the deists in my circle examine many different religions as a point of principle. And I believe that this is a wise thing to do, especially if you've taken on or plan to take on like a mentor role of some type. It's just something to think about. But, for instance, I grabbed a few just as a point of reference, and if you're needing book ideas, here's a book on the world's religions. William Young did a really good job on that. Deism isn't necessarily in there, which is unfortunate, but pretty basic stuff. Of course, I've got the New Testament. I've got the Jefferson Bible. I've got other texts as well. It's it's important, I think, to examine the things that you disagree with. You know, I've used this example. You know, if you're a football team, you're a coach for a football team, you're going to examine video of your opponent. You know, you're going to have similar plays, perhaps, but ultimately, you're trying to examine what the opponent is doing or thinking. I think that's important. Yes, of course. If you're curious about whether or not you should or shouldn't, do it. You know, always try to examine as much as you can. Anyway, for those of you who have looked into my work on other channels or websites, if you've read any of my books or read the articles, watched or listened to any of my interviews, or whatever, let me say that I appreciate the support and hope you've gained something substantial from them. It looks like it's going to be a busy year, and that's going to be good, so I'll look forward to more of that support. For those of you who haven't read my book, Reason, Religion, or the Trinity and Contradictions, I would encourage you to do that. Of course, if you're interested in natural health, be sure to check out the Biotic Protocol, or, you know, again, you can check out any of my other books. That would be cool as well. You can check those out at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, many other online retailers, not to leave anybody out. Don't forget that if you've read any of my work, don't forget to leave a review. It helps out more than you know. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this video. Guys, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care.